Right, so I think it's time to do a little bit of analysis on the first print and what worked. In fact, no, we won't bother looking at what worked because what's the point? What didn't work quite well. So the first of those obviously was the heat bed. So going to have a lot closer look at what's going on with that. Oh, it's clearly not working properly, so yeah, need to have a look at that. And also I want to have a look to see why I had to manually control the temperatures, in as much as I actually had to remove all the temperatures from the G code, because as soon as I left them in, nothing would print. And then of course the sort of little elephant in the room, or the small red boat in the room, if you like, why it failed. Why it just suddenly got to a point on the print and started printing into mid-air. And whilst we're doing that, we'll look at all the other sort of, or any other quality issues, and try and address those as well. So we're going to crack on, because I want to get a successful print out today. So let's have a look at these issues in a little bit more detail. Firstly, the heated bed. Well, it's heating up, and always has done right from the beginning, heated up very slowly, and then even once it gets there, if it gets to the temperature, has a real problem maintaining it. And thirdly, I've noticed that it looks like it's doing PWM when it's cool, i.e. when you first turn it on, it jumps up to about 12 amps, which is, yeah, about right. But then very quickly it jumps down to much less than 12, sometimes down to 4 or 5. And I've seen the red light, that the LED that shows that the MOSFET is kicking in and out, flickering, and I can hear my the power supply that's powering it also kicking in and out. So there's definitely something going wrong there, which of course must be the PIDs. Now obviously the PIDs are controlled by Marlin, so there must be some configuration for them. So the first place we're going to look is in configuration H. And we can see that I've got a section that I've marked up as PIDs, and if we open it up and have a look at it, the first section here is to do with the hot end PIDs. Now I didn't really have any issues with the hot end, so we're going to ignore that for a sec. Moving on down a bit, we can see we've got a section for PID bed temperature control. Now I believe that this was probably commented out, this define HID temp bed. Which means that normally it would be disabled. Now foolishly I enabled it, thinking, yeah, I want that. I guess the shortcut to all of this, and maybe the recommended way of doing it, is not enabling PIDs for the heated bed. However, I did enable it, and of course now I don't want to go back. I want to try and get this right. So I'm going to leave it enabled. What that's done is, once you've enabled that, it then runs this code here. This would be skipped if that's disabled, but it's not. Because it's enabled, and it's defining some default PIs and Ds. And if you look at the comments here, which I probably should have done, it's for a completely different heat bed. This is 120 volt 250 watt heated bed, which is nothing like a 12 volt heated bed that I've got, which is probably around about 144 watts at best. So yeah, obviously it's not going to work. So there's a little comment down here that's included there that says basically you can run your own auto tune with an M303 command. So that being an M code, I've looked it up on the RepRap wiki, and here that is. Here you can see we've got M303 run PID tuning, and if we look at it, the basic usage is M303, set the temperature and the number of cycles. It's got a repetier thing there. Bed usage, others, which is what we want, is M303 E-1, and then the number of cycles, and then the temperature that you want to achieve. So yeah, basically the number of cycles is how many times you want it to heat up to that temperature. Remove power, let it cool down, and heat up again to get, you know, obviously the more times you do it, the better it can learn what's needed to get there and maintain it. Now, in the configuration H, they recommend to do 8 cycles, so I will do 8 cycles. And seeing as I'm, you know, probably at this point in time anyway, and I'm going to do PLA, I'll set my temperature to 60 degrees. So let's move on over to Pronterface and try an M303 to do the tuning of the bed PIDs. Right, so here we are back in Pronterface. Let's connect to the printer. There it is connected. So let's first of all let's run a PID tune on the bed. And to do that we do an M303 E-1 to target the bed, 8 cycles, and we'll set the target temperature to 60 degrees. So there it goes, it starts doing its PID. We should see over here the bed temperature rising. There it goes, it's rising. So we basically wait for it to get up to temperature. If we open up the graphs here, so hopefully it will reach to 60 degrees, and I can see already that the current being drawn from the power supply is now a nice steady 12 amps rather than dropping down. So this is not doing any hokey pokey anymore. This is applying all the power it's got to get it up to 60 degrees ASAP, and then once it gets there it should let it cool for a second and then heat up, and basically that's how it's going to figure out how it should do that most efficiently in the future. And it'll do that 8 times and we will have some new PIDs. So we're going to fast forward this bit and come back when it's finished. So there we go, it's done its thing. Close the graph down, and if we go back up here we can see the resulting PIDs are here. So what we'll do is we'll copy those and we shall put them in the relevant section in here, and I'm going to put them at the bottom here. We shall comment the stock ones out. I'll just make a little comment here as to what these are. Right, so that should take care of that. Whilst we are here doing auto tunes, I will do an auto tune on the hot end as well. I mean, it seemed to be working fine, but well, yeah, why not? And I'll set the target temperature to 215 will do. Yeah, so set that going, and I'll speed it up until it's finished and then we'll get back. Right, there we go, it's done its 8 cycles around 215 degrees. We can see that it's given us some KPIs for the hot end. KPIs. I'm obviously in work mode. How long have I been saying KPIs for? Right, PIDs. If I said KPIs at any point beforehand, please ignore me. I meant PIDs. Right, so we'll copy those out of there. We shall go back to the configuration H file, go up a little bit to the actual hot end PID area, paste them in, do the same thing. So there we go, I've added a little comment, pasted them in. Of course we shall comment out the default ones. Yeah, there's a bit of difference in the I and the D, but the P's pretty much the same. If you have ever worked with motion control systems, or indeed quadcopters and the like, you'll probably know what they are. If you don't know, you probably don't want to know. Right, so that's in there. We'll save it, and we shall just go over to Pronterface, disconnect, and upload. Hopefully that should take care of the PIDs. We'll find out shortly enough. So let's move on to the next little issue I had, which was the G-code. Now I put in my custom G-code box in Slicer some, well, mostly M codes that deal with setting the extruder and the bed temperature. Well, what I found out was as soon as you send it to the printer, it runs that G code and obviously the M code, and it comes to one of these, which is the M190. Which tells it to set the bed temperature to whatever you ask it to, and wait until until it gets to that temperature for a certain period of time. What's happening is that that wait means that you no longer have control from Pronterface, so you can't, or I couldn't do anything until that temperature is reached. And sadly, it was never getting there, at least never getting there stable enough for it to stop waiting and pass control back to Pronterface. So that's why it never started. So basically, I'm hoping that that was just the PIDs that should be fixed. So I popped the old little 3D benchy that came out of out of the printer under the microscope, and at a low magnification we're looking at, well, this area here is obviously where it completely went wrong. But before that it was starting to go a bit wibbly wobbly. You can see this area here and this area here. Now if I zoom in a bit closer, I can see that the layer below this one running along here seems to go down just fine. It runs all the way along, there's no problem at all. And then the layer above seems to go fine, it goes all the way along, and there's no issue apart from where it's got a little divot here. But if we look at the layer that had the issue, obviously I'm not entirely sure which direction it was coming from, whether it came from this direction or this direction. But it's bonded just fine there, and it's bonded just fine beyond here. So I'm not sure whether this is an adhesion issue or whether it's just a lack of filament, i.e. under extrusion. So I had a little closer look at this area here, so I'll zoom into that a minute. Now unfortunately with a microscope it's got almost non-existent depth of field, so we got a little bit sharp here and then it tails away into softness. What I'm expecting to see here is, if it was an adhesion issue, where has the filament gone that didn't adhere? So could it be that actually what's happening is that the filament just runs dry, and you can see there's the layer below, there's the layer above, and here's the layer, and it sort of just more or less peters out. And then it sort of suddenly kicks back in, or it was printing from this direction and it very suddenly kicked out and comes back in. But I think this one's quite telling here. The last layer that actually worked is there's a little bit of filament sort of hanging in midair, but that is, you can almost see it's narrowing to a point. I believe what's happening is, rather than adhesion, because the rest of that is adhered just fine, it then starts getting elongated, which suggests to me that filament just isn't getting pushed out. So the long and the short of all that is, I don't think it's a temperature related thing. Well, it may be, everything's kind of linked with this, but I think primarily the actual issue is under extrusion. What's causing that, I don't know. I'm going to sort of belt and braces a little bit. I'm going to maximize the power on the driver stepper that drives the extruder stepper. I may crank down the filament tensioner just to make sure that's not slipping. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that, I think, and hope for the best. If it does it again, then I'll probably have to run it with a slightly higher temperature. With the heat bed working properly, that may help. So first of all, I'm going to just try it again with you know, a little bit more extrusion grunt behind it, if you like, and see what happens. So yeah, okay, for the extruder, well, I've kind of tested it with a little bit of filament manually. I could make it slip, but then I guess I could with a pair of pliers and pulling quite hard. I increased the sense voltage on the stepper driver for the extruder motor up to 1.2 volts and tried it again. I've also tightened down a little bit because they're already pretty aggressive, the springs on the filament tensioner. I've tightened it down a little bit, and after doing those two things, I literally could not stop the filament with a pair of pliers. It kept pulling it through. So it's definitely got more grunt now. Whether that was a problem or not, I don't know. With the change to the PIDs on the heat bed's obviously going to act a lot better. So those two things alone hopefully should help. I've kind of chickened it, and I really shouldn't do it. Anybody shouldn't do it. I'm going to increase the temperature slightly. I probably really should just do one thing at a time to see what, but I'm too impatient. So I've increased the temperature slightly in the slicer. So hopefully those things are going to make a big difference. Going to jump into pronto, well, big difference. Hopefully they'll make a difference, and a good difference. So I'm going to jump into Prontoface now, load up the new G code. Nothing new to see here really. I will load up the file, send it to the printer, and this time around I'm going to use the webcam and speed it up. The reason being is the time lapse I did last time is all good and well, but I only had it on 10 seconds between each shot, which really doesn't give you a lot of information if you want to try and diagnose what went wrong, because a lot happens in 10 seconds. The quality on this webcam's a bit... quality on most of my cameras is a bit, to be honest, but the webcam is particularly rubbish. So, yeah, let's get printing. That turned out a little bit better than before. So just running through the things that I covered last time to see how successful they were this time. So the heated bed, yeah, fine. After sorting out the PIDs, it heated up relatively quickly, and it maintained that temperature, no problem at all. At least at 55 degrees. As I'm going to be running it off 24 volts in a not too distant future, obviously I'm going to have to redo the tuning on the PIDs again. But yeah, so that's all sorted. The G-code at the beginning, yeah, purely was just down to the fact that it was sitting there waiting for the heated bed to get up to temperature, and it never did. So putting back my original G-code, custom G-code before the start of the print worked fine. It did exactly what it should do, get up to temperature, start the print and do all that kind of stuff. The G-code at the end didn't quite do what I wanted it to. It just kind of stopped with the nozzle more or less in the last position, right on top of the little chimney, and left a little blob. But that was my error. I used a G1 command to move. There was no feed rate. What I should have done is used a G0, or given it a feed rate even. And yeah, so the other thing I'm going to do in the future is do a little bit of a retraction right at the end there, and then just lift it out of the way as quickly as possible. Other than that, the G-code seemed just fine. So, to the main thing really, the print quality. Well, obviously it didn't fail this time, so that's good. Let's have a quick look at it. So it's all come out pretty much as you would expect. In fact, it's fine. It's almost perfect. There's a couple of little issues here, which is nothing, it's nothing to do with the actual printer itself. It's just down to now spending an ongoing exercise really of tweaking things. What I would say off the bat looking at this is that you won't be able to see on the camera here because all the imperfections are really quite small. I need to tune the retraction setting slightly because it's got some little spikes where it Z-hops. There is minimal amount of stringing between those bridges, between the gaps here. Really minimal. I'm not even bothered about that, to be honest, because, well, I'm just not. You can wipe it away with your finger. I would like to get rid of just the little sort of spiky bits that are left when it pops up in the air. There is a slight bit of, not quite adhering particularly well just on a couple of layers, but I think this is just down to optimizing the temperatures now. There is also a little bit, I'm not sure if you can see it, a little bit of a elephant's foot on there, but again this is going to come down to optimizing the settings in the slicer and getting temperature, fan speeds right. I would say, if anything, it is under extruding very slightly, and the reason why I say that is, well, I think some of these slight gaps here might be aided by a little bit of extra extrusion. They're certainly not over extruding on the top surfaces. You can just about see it possibly if I hold it right. That while it's not it's not hideous, there's no gaps really. It is right on the edge. So a tiny little bit of additional extrusion on the extrusion multiplier. I will give that a go. And you can see underneath, if this was absolutely bang on, I think that would be a lot more filled in and smooth. But all in all, I've got absolutely nothing to complain about there. After basically 2 prints, it's perfectly fine for me. I mean, going forwards, I'm going to use this thing for printing out parts. which don't really need to look good, they just need to perform the function. So, you know, while I'd like to get it as good as I can, because certainly extrusion leads to strength and all that kind of stuff, and I'm going to need to get pretty good at this before I attempt to get some ABS printing properly. And I need to do that pretty quick, because nearly all the stuff that I want to do, it needs to be out of ABS, because PLA is just going to be too brittle. The exercise of, you know, tuning the slicer settings is just going to be ongoing. But what I can say now is that the printer build and the firmware and everything is fine. There's no massive changes needed. In fact, hardly anything at all, I don't think. At least not at the moment. So that means I can now crack on and get it finished off properly, which I'll be doing over the next coming videos. The first thing I'm going to do is, you know, tidy up all of the electronic stuff. Yeah, I'll design somewhere to some sort of housing for the boards. Yeah, tidy up all the wiring then. At the same time I need to do the upgrades. I'll replace the polyfuses and the MOSFETs. They really are working at and probably just over their limit, really. So I need to incorporate all that into my sort of final electronics and wiring solution. Then I'm going to get Octoprint set up, because the Mac here really just, because it's an old Mac with an old version of OS X, it can't communicate with the printer. The laptop I've been using is ancient as well, although it does work. It's it's hard work, so I'd rather run this thing remotely from my main PC. Yeah, is that it? I think it could be. So all in all, very successful. Now start the upgrades.